Marcus Brutus breaks from the conspiracy and tells Caesar everything, and the Roman Republic dies in a single conversation. On the morning of March 15, 44 BCE, roughly 60 senators prepare to murder the most powerful man in the world. Julius Caesar, dictator perpetuo, is expected at the theater of Pompeii for a session of the Senate. The conspirators, led by Gaius Cassius Longinus and Brutus himself, have hidden daggers beneath their togas. The plan is simple. Surround Caesar under the pretense of presenting a petition, then strike together so that no single hand bears the guilt alone. Outside, the conspirator Trebonius will delay Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul and most dangerous loyalist, keeping him clear of the killing floor. Caesar's Spanish bodyguard has already been dismissed at the door, his own gesture of trust in the Senate he has pact with his allies. But Brutus cannot do it. He has been torn for weeks between his family legacy, descended from the Lucius Junius Brutus, who expelled Rome's last king, and his personal debt to Caesar, who pardoned him after the Battle of Pharsalus when he might justly have ordered his execution. The soothsayer Spurinna's warning to beware the Ides echoes in his mind. So does Calpurnia's dream, which Caesar himself mentioned dismissively that morning. Something in Brutus breaks. He pulls Caesar aside in the antechamber of the theater, moments before the session convenes, and speaks the words that will reshape civilization. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. Caesar listens, his face hardens. He does not hesitate. He sends a runner to recall his bodyguard, orders his officers to seal every exit from the theater of Pompeii, and walks into the Senate chamber not as a victim, but as a judge. What none of the conspirators realize, what will not become clear for hours, is that their plot has already become their death sentence. Mark Antony bursts through the doors of the theater of Pompeii with armed men at his back, and the Senate descends into chaos. Trebonius, who was supposed to keep Antony occupied outside, finds himself shoved against a column and disarmed by soldiers who materialized from nowhere. Inside, the conspirators recognize the trap too late. Some reach for the daggers hidden beneath their togas, others freeze. Caesar stands at the center of the chamber, flanked by his recalled Spanish bodyguard, pointing at faces in the crowd. Him, that one. The arrests unfold with brutal efficiency. More than 40 senators are seized within the hour. Some go quietly, the blood draining from their faces as they understand what Brutus has done. Others resist and are beaten to the marble floor. Cassius, the architect of the conspiracy, attempts to slip out through a service entrance. He makes it as far as the Via Appia before mounted soldiers run him down. He is dragged back to Rome in chains, but it is the arrest of Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus that cuts Caesar deepest. Decimus is not a political enemy. He is Caesar's trusted general, a man who fought beside him in Gaul, a man Caesar considered a friend. It was Decimus who convinced Caesar to attend the Senate that morning despite his hesitations. Learning that this man, this friend, had been part of the plot to butcher him, produces a cold fury in Caesar that witnesses will later describe as more terrifying than any battlefield rage they had ever seen, and the trials that followed would prove just how deep that fury ran. Caesar conducts the trials himself, seated on a raised tribunal in the Forum, with the Roman populace watching from every rooftop and colonnade. The proceedings carry a veneer of legality. Witnesses testify, evidence is presented, but the outcome is never in doubt. Cassius speaks last, defending tyrannicide as a sacred Roman tradition, invoking the ancestors who overthrew kings. Caesar listens with an expression witnesses describe as stone. When Cassius finishes, Caesar delivers his verdict without deliberation: death. Decimus Brutus follows. Then 12 more conspirators whose names will be largely forgotten by history, overshadowed by the scale of the purge surrounding them. Executions proceed within days. Strangulation in the Tullianum prison, Rome's ancient method for dispatching enemies of the state. Marcus Brutus alone is spared. Caesar's act of mercy confounds observers. Some attribute it to genuine affection. The persistent rumor that Brutus might be Caesar's illegitimate son lends this reading weight. Others see cold calculation. Executing the man who saved his life would undermine the narrative Caesar is constructing, that of a just ruler betrayed by ungrateful aristocrats. Brutus is exiled to Greece, stripped of his estates and honors, forbidden from returning to Italy on pain of death. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great orator, finds himself in a different kind of danger. He was not among the conspirators, but he knew. Letters surfaced suggesting he was aware of the plot and offered it his tacit approval. Caesar strips him of his offices, his seat in the Senate, his right to plead cases in court. Cicero retreats to his villa in Tusculum, a private citizen for the first time in decades, alive but politically annihilated. The most articulate voice for Republican government falls silent. And in that silence, Caesar begins to build something entirely new. Caesar remakes the Senate in his own image, and the old aristocracy watches its power dissolve like salt in water. The body already numbers over 900 members, swollen by Caesar's earlier additions. Now he goes further. Equestrians, wealthy Romans of the merchant and administrative class, receive senatorial rank by the dozen. Military veterans, men who fought in Gaul and crossed the Rubicon at Caesar's side, take seats once reserved for families that traced their lineage to Rome's founding. Most provocatively, provincial elites from Gaul and Hispania enter the Senate, men whose grandfathers fought against Roman legions. The old patricians consider this defilement. Caesar considers it reform. The effect is precise and devastating. The Senate becomes a rubber stamp. With hundreds of new members who owe their positions entirely to Caesar, no vote goes against him. The traditional factions that had paralyzed Roman governance for decades, the endless feuds between optimates and populares, the procedural obstruction, the political violence masquerading as republican virtue, all of it evaporates. Legislation passes at Caesar's direction. Appointments flow from his hand. The Republic's constitution, already battered by decades of civil war from Marius and Sulla through the Catiline conspiracy and Caesar's own crossing of the Rubicon, becomes a hollow shell. Rome's urban populace barely notices. The plebs and the veterans love Caesar. His land reforms have settled thousands of families on productive farms. His public works programs employ thousands more. The Julian calendar, replacing the chaotic system that had seasons drifting through months, is hailed as a gift to civilization itself. The people who might have mourned the Republic are the people who never benefited from it. But the question no one is asking yet, what happens when Caesar is gone, will soon demand an answer. 16 Roman legions cross the Euphrates in the spring of 43 BCE, and Caesar finally avenges Rome's greatest military humiliation. The Parthian campaign had been planned for years. Caesar was originally scheduled to depart on March 18, 44 BCE, just 3 days after the Ides. The conspiracy delayed nothing. It merely changed the political ground beneath the army's feet. Now Caesar marches east, not just as a military commander, but as an unchallenged autocrat with nothing left to fear at home. The Senate he left behind will do as it is told. The campaign proceeds with the methodical brilliance that conquered Gaul. Caesar avoids the mistake that destroyed Marcus Licinius Crassus at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, where 7 Roman legions were annihilated by Parthian horse archers in the open desert. Instead, Caesar advances along river valleys, keeps his supply lines short, and refuses battle on terrain that favors Parthian cavalry. He fights the war the way Rome fights best, through engineering, logistics, and the grinding discipline of the legions. Mesopotamia falls in stages. Parthian resistance collapses not through any single decisive battle, but through the relentless pressure of an army that cannot be outmaneuvered and will not retreat. Caesar recovers the eagle standards lost at Carrhae, a symbolic victory that sends Rome into celebrations lasting weeks. By autumn, Mesopotamia is a Roman province, the wealthiest addition to the empire since Egypt. The grain, the trade routes, the tax revenue make Caesar's treasury virtually inexhaustible. He writes to the Senate, though writes to is perhaps more accurate than reports to, that Rome's eastern frontier is secure. But the man who secured it is aging, and a question he has refused to answer will soon answer itself. Caesar returns from Parthia in triumph, but the Rome he returns to is already whispering about what comes after him. He is 58 years old. The epileptic seizures he has suffered for years have grown more frequent. Veterans who served with him in Gaul barely recognize the gaunt figure who rides into Rome. The campaigns have consumed what remained of his physical strength. Caesar knows this, his enemies know it, and two young men are watching each other across the width of the Roman world, calculating Caesar's formal adoption of his 18-year-old grandnephew Gaius Octavius, now Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, settles the dynastic question with characteristic bluntness. Octavian receives command of the Eastern legions, governance of the new Mesopotamian province, and the unmistakable designation as Caesar's political heir. The young man is slight, frequently ill, and possessed of a cold intelligence that unnerves everyone who underestimates him. Mark Antony accepts the consulship as compensation. On the surface, the arrangement appears balanced. Antony holds Rome while Octavian holds the East. But Antony had expected more. He fought for Caesar. He stormed into the theater of Pompey with armed men when the conspiracy collapsed. He has commanded legions in the field while Octavian studied rhetoric in Apollonia. The rivalry between them deepens in silence, expressed through careful courtesies that deceive no one. Caesar, from his sickbed, watches this tension with the detachment of a man who knows he will not live to resolve it. He has given Rome an heir. Whether Rome will accept the gift remains to be seen. Julius Caesar dies in his sleep on September 14, 42 BCE, likely from a series of strokes compounded by the epilepsy that plagued him for decades. There are no daggers this time, no blood on the Senate floor, no dramatic last words. The most powerful man in the world simply stops breathing in his villa on the Quirinal Hill, attended by physicians who can do nothing and freedmen who weep openly. He is 61 years old. The news travels through Rome like a tremor through stone. Markets close, temples fill. Veterans who fought at Alesia and Pharsalus and in the deserts of Mesopotamia gather in the forum, uncertain, grieving, waiting for someone to tell them what happens now. Caesar has left behind a transformed world, a reformed calendar that will endure for 16 centuries, a conquered Parthia that secures Rome's eastern frontier for generations, a centralized state apparatus that functions through his will and his appointees and his veterans. What he has not left behind is a constitution. There is no framework for transferring the power he accumulated, no precedent for what he built. The office of dictator perpetuo was designed for one man. That man is dead. Octavian receives the news in Mesopotamia. He is 19 years old, commanding legions comprised of men twice his age, holding a province won by a man whose name he now carries. He begins the journey back to Rome immediately. Antony, already in the capital, moves swiftly to secure the treasury, the loyalty of the urban garrison, and the political machinery Caesar built. Both men understand that the next weeks will determine whether Caesar's legacy survives or fragments into another cycle of civil war. Octavian arrives in Rome and does not fight a war. That is the difference. In our timeline, Caesar's assassination unleashed 14 years of civil conflict, the wars between Antony and the conspirators, the proscriptions that killed Cicero and thousands more, the final cataclysmic struggle between Antony and Octavian at Actium. The Roman Republic drowned in blood before the Principate could emerge from its wreckage. Here, none of that happens. Octavian inherits not a shattered state, but a functioning autocracy. The legions are loyal, the Senate is compliant, the populace is fed. The apparatus of one-man rule has been running for years, and the transition from Caesar to his heir resembles less a revolution than a succession. There are tensions. Antony's ambitions do not evaporate. Provincial governors test the boundaries of the new order, but Octavian, who will eventually take the name Augustus, as in our timeline, possesses the machinery of power that his adoptive father spent a lifetime building. He does not need to fight for it. He simply occupies it. The principate that emerges is smoother, more deliberate, less traumatized than the one history produced. But it carries a deeper cost, one that will take generations to become visible. The Roman people never experienced the years of civil war that followed Caesar's assassination in our world. They never witnessed the Republic's final convulsions, the proscription lists nailed to the forum walls, the battles between citizen armies. They never learned through suffering what the loss of their republic actually means. Rome becomes an empire without ever fully understanding that it stopped being a republic. The transition happens not with a crash, but with a whisper, a slow, quiet surrender of liberties that most citizens never knew they possessed. Caesar's survival gives Rome stability, conquests, and order. What it takes away is harder to name: the memory of choice, the habit of resistance, the knowledge, however painful, that power unchecked will always demand a reckoning. In this timeline, that reckoning simply never comes, and whether that makes this Rome better or worse than the one history gave us is a question without a comfortable answer.